Hey there. Tonight we are going to do a quick walk through a book that I covered recently in a 10-minute book summary called Drawing the Head and Hands by Andrew Loomis. So we're going to take a quick walk through that, and I'm also going to share some details regarding some ways with which I'm mounting some of my latest pastel paintings or drawings on this nice stiff self-adhesive backing, and then we'll call it a day. So I'm going to go ahead and flip this around, and we're going to go ahead and get started. You can see my little portrait of Monet there. I'll probably use that as the process by which I'll show you how I'm mounting these pastel drawings on this stiff foam backing. But before we get to that, I'm just going to set this aside. We're going to go ahead and do a quick walk through Drawing the Head and Hands by Andrew Loomis. We'll do a little bit of a read through in certain sections as well. So this is a book that I stumbled upon. I attended a workshop, an online workshop for pastel portraiture with Alan Picard, and in the supplemental critique session and Q&A session, he recommended this particular book, and it's interesting. So Andrew Loomis, he's done apparently a series of books, and he has some recommendations, if you will, from notable artists like Norman Rockwell. You can see that here in the inside sleeve. That's pretty impressive, right? And other renowned artists as well, notable artists. So when we make our way through this book, right here in the inside page, you can see it does a nice job of outlining the series of books, and I'll probably eventually work my way through them all. But three-dimensional drawing, creative illustration, figure drawing for all it's worth, and then fun with a pencil. So those are other books that he's written, but I started out with the head and hands, drawing the head and hands. And I'm grateful I did, because it's really, really helped me quite a bit. And throughout the book, you can see some of Loomis's fantastic pencil drawings, like this one. Looks like with the mother and child, and just phenomenal drawings and illustrations. Look at these hands with the interlaced fingers here. It's just remarkably done, remarkably well done by the author, Andrew Loomis. And get some insights into when the book was published. You can see here, in this particular run, it was 2011, but the original published date was 1943. So this book's a little dated. Some of the language is somewhat dated, but most of it is just gold, pure gold. So here's how it's structured. Here's a table of contents. I'm going to zoom out so you can see this a little bit better. Table of contents, pretty extensive. Starts with a short chat with the reader. Just some amazing perspectives on drawing the human face and drawing from life are provided just within this intro. And then it goes into part one, men's heads, and then it talks about all these little subtopics. It's just filled with amazing information. Part two is women's heads, and it goes through a similar kind of rich bit of information about drawing women's heads, because there are some subtle differences, obviously anatomically, even in just the heads, the construction of our heads between men and women. And in addition to that, he goes into drawing babies' heads, small children's heads, and he breaks it out, amongst children of all ages. And you can see he goes into small children, school-age children, teenagers, and then finally, probably my second favorite part of the book, the hands. Part 5, he goes into the anatomy of the hands, block forms of the hand, proportions, and all kinds of tips and techniques as it relates to drawing the human hands in all kinds of poses. Now, I know the lighting's bad, and this is a big book with small print in the areas where the text is a little richer. But, in this opening section where he labels the intro, a short chat with the reader, and it definitely just feels like a chat the way that it's written. I'll read through some of this, just to share some insights. If you get a chance, if you want a briefer summary of what this book's all about, you can check out my 10-minute book brief video, which I posted just a few days prior to this walkthrough or read-through. You'll get a quicker summary, but I'm just trying to give you a little bit more of the context here through this read-through or walkthrough, if you will. So here you can see, let's see. I like this here. I underlined it. I underscored it. One of my favorite quotes in the book. Through our faces, nature not only identifies us, but tells the world a good deal more about each of us. Our thoughts, our emotions, and attitudes, even the kinds of lives we live, register in our faces. And that's so true, right? So, if you happen to be painting, let's say, a fisherman who spends time out to sea in the sun, they're going to have weathered skin. The back of their necks might look leathery and so on and so forth. Kind of gives you an indication of what type of life that person's living. So these are things, that artists observe. And throughout this book, Loomis gives some insights in as far as how you can transmute that into good drawings. Here on the very next column on the same page in this long intro, he goes on to say, let me say at the beginning that to draw a head effectively is not a matter of soul searching or mind reading. It is primarily a matter of interpreting form correctly in its proportion, perspective, and lighting. All other qualities enter drawing as a result of the way that form is interpreted. If the artist gets that right, the soul and character is revealed. As artists, we only see and analyze and set down. A pair of eyes drawn constructively and incorrect values will appear to be alive because of craftsmanship, not because of the artist's ability to read the sitter's soul. And that is so true. I found that myself through experience. When you get lost in trying to focus on the details that might reveal the soul of a person or a dog or whoever it is or whatever it is that you're trying to draw, it can set you on the wrong course. However, if you focus on just arranging and placing the features in the right way and then making those little micro adjustments that are needed once you've done that, you're going to put yourself in a better position to have a successful drawing or painting. And there's so much more. He gives some interesting illustrations here. He's talking about, how it's best to start with an understanding of the shape of the skull and the various parts of the head that do not move, and gives some interesting explanations there and as far as how that will influence a drawing. Here he goes on to say, in a related little phrase or stanza, he says that the thing to remember is that the skull is fixed in position and with exception of the jaw, immovable, and that the flesh is mobile and ever-changing and also affected by health, emotion, and age. So, if you think about that's something we've all observed. If you have somebody who's unhealthy, they have the flu, they're sick, they have some sort of terminal disease, their skin might look unhealthy. If you have somebody who is angry or excited, they might be a little flush depending upon their skin pigmentation. If they're active, they might be a little flush or they might be a little sweaty or glistening. If they're older, obviously that'll change the quality, nature, and texture of their skin as well. So here's another kind of interrelated set of ideas, and this is just in the intro. The big difference between the completely amateur attempt and the well-grounded approach is that the beginner starts by setting eyes, ears, noses, and mouths into blank white space surrounded by some sort of outline for the face. This is drawing in the two dimension of height and width only. We must somehow get into the third dimension of thickness, which means that we must draw the whole head as it exists in space and build the face upon it. By doing so, we are able not only to place the features, but also to establish the planes of light and shadow, and further to identify humps, bumps, and creases as being caused by the underlying structure of the muscle, bone, and fat. So, that interrelated, interdependent understanding of anatomy is really going to play a role there, and that's kind of the point that he's making. And he makes similar points throughout the rest of this section. And then we go right into some incredible line drawings of faces, just illustrating how even though the anatomy of the skull is pretty much the same, if not very similar for all of us, you're going to have different shaped faces and heads, and you're going to have to be able to adjust in accordance with what you see for a particular sitter or subject. A receding jaw, a round jaw, different features attached to the same sort of cranium shape, develop of a narrow head, a wide head, a heavy bone flaring jaw, and so on and so forth. There's a pretty incredible line drawing here. I don't know who this subject is, but this was painted in the 1940s, I imagine, maybe the 1930s. Kind of reminds me of Tom Brady. But he jumps into men's heads. It's part one, and right out of the gates, just some phenomenal ideas and language intending to help us prepare to draw more effectively. What's interesting here is he gets into not only the mechanics of drawing and different aspects of drawing effectively, but he gets into motivation. So he talks about learning, and then here he goes into some ideas about motivation and learn and behind learning and how it's going to help learn effectively and deeply. He says there must be a genuine basic motive behind any genuine effort. Ask yourself quite honestly, what do I really want to draw heads and draw them, or why do I want to draw heads and draw them well? Is it for the satisfaction of personal accomplishment? Does it mean enough to you to give up time from other things in order to learn? Do you hope someday to sell your work and make it your means of livelihood, I should say? Would you like to draw portraits, girls' heads for calendars, illustrations for magazine stories, the people on advertisements? Do you want to improve your drawing of heads to help sell your work? Is drawing a form of relaxation to you, helping you relieve tension and clear your mind of worries and other problems? Search quietly and thoroughly for this basic motive because if it is powerful enough, it will give your efforts the strength to withstand discouragement, disappointment, disillusionment, or even seeming failure. So, that is just incredibly powerful. I mean, this kind of framework for understanding your why can be so powerful in any endeavor when you're trying to learn a new skill or venture into a new realm, whether it be sports, whether it be starting a business or what have you. So kind of interesting to think about it this way, and a great way to starting with your why. And at least think about it and understand it. I will tell you all those apply in my personal instance. I definitely hope to become a better artist. It does help me pass the time in a healthier way than I otherwise might spend it. It does help me relax, and I do hope to sell more artwork, to be frank, as well as time passes. But there is just so much more. One of the things here that resonated is his emphasis on, he asks it as a question initially. He says, "May I add one suggestion? Whatever your motive, try not to be impatient. Impatience has probably been a bigger stumbling block in the way of real ability than anything else." And, that resonates with me. I've seen that in myself. I can be quite impatient, especially when I'm eager to learn something new or progress. Sometimes I'll just try to force my way into, improving in some area, and the tendency is to rush. And that's just not usually a good idea. And that's definitely the case when trying to get better at painting human heads and hands, or anything for that matter, or drawing. Patience pays off. Take it step by step. Take it slowly. Really internalize what you're learning is what he's suggesting here, and it'll go a long way to lay a strong foundation for future growth. Now we get into really what is one of the big ideas of this book, which is the introduction of the ball and plane, which is the way with which he suggests we start building the structure of the head. And he has some great information that he shares here about it throughout. He talks about how the old masters used to spend hours upon hours drawing a cast or doing cast drawings. And he suggests that one way to accelerate that and still yet be patient on your journey is to use this ball and plane technique. And I'm just adjusting my camera here, so bear with me. But you can see, he talks about it here and talks about starting with the ball or sphere. And he says that every human cranium really is, in its basic form, a sphere that has a plane on both sides of the sphere, right around where the ear and the temple are, that's sliced off. And he kind of illustrates that here in a little cartoon kind of line drawing. And then he goes on to show how you could measure out the facial plane and the jaw. And by building it off of the sphere, it'll help naturally establish a three-dimensionality that you tend to see missing from a lot of drawings of the human head. And he shows that you can have some reliable rules of thumb or guides to follow with regards to proportionality. On this sphere, you'll have the hairline, and then the plane runs down, and if you divide the plane from the hairline to the bottom of the chin into thirds, equal thirds, you'll get a reliable cross line in the brow line, and then you'll also have a line for the bottom of the nose, and then you can further subdivide those sections to very reliably have a generally strong, accurate placement of the other features on the face and the head. And from there, you can modify the placement, the size, and the shapes to better align with the actual subject that you're drawing. Here's a little picture here I drew. I forget who the model was, but there was a live model sitting in front of me, and I actually drew that using the ball and plane as an experiment. That's my drawing right there. So, what's interesting is these cross lines he defines as kind of like the equator, and the vertical axis that runs from the chin through the nose to the top of the head. You can use that as a means of really building some three-dimensional illusions. Here's an example of his writing out some explanation of this. He says the ears attach along the halfway line up and down at a distance about equal to the space from the brows to the bottom of the nose. The ball can be tipped in any direction, and he kind of shows that here, kind of like the axis of the earth. He makes some comparisons to that with the prime meridian and the equator and so on and so forth. And you can see some more complete progressions of drawings here with the head tilted at all different angles and how he uses the ball and plane to capture that accurately. And there's just so many thoughts. You can see my notations anywhere I have parentheses or exclamation points or stars or quotations. Those are very notable, helpful words there or phrases. I'll read some of those aloud and we'll move on. So the most important point, according to Loomis, is the most important point in the head from which to build the construction of the face is the point immediately above the bridge of the nose between the brows. This point remains always fixed and is indicated by the vertical line of the nose and the cross line of the brows. On the ball, this junction of the equator and the prime meridian, the two lines that cut the ball in half vertically and horizontally, all measurements spring from this point. About halfway up from this point to the top center of the head, we get the hairline, and have therefore spaced off the forehead. Dropping down an equal distance below the cross point, we get the length of the nose. And since the distance from the tip of the nose to the brow is on average equal to the height of the forehead, measuring the same distance down, we get to the bottom of the chin. For the distance from the bottom of the chin to the base of the nose equals the space from there to the brows, and from that point to the hairline. So it's 1, 2, 3 spaces, all equal, put down the middle of the line of the face. And there you have it. So very nice, easy, quick way to draw the human head. Here he goes on to say, no one detail of the bone structure is of great importance, but its total shape. No one detail of the bone structure is of great importance, but its total shape is of paramount importance. Within the shape, we must locate the eye sockets, spacing them carefully on either side of the middle line. We locate the two cheekbones opposite the other, and the bridge of the nose, which must lie on the middle line at the top and extend out from the middle line at the bottom. We locate the corner of the jaw and bring the jawline down to the chin. Every head must be constructed so that all the features balance on the middle line. And he references plate 6, which kind of illustrates that. Here's plate 3. There are a lot of plates. That's these cluster of drawings that he has throughout the book. And you can see, he kind of just fills up the pages with really helpful drawings. Here's plate 6. That's what he referenced earlier. And there's just so much helpful information. If you were just to look at these drawings and copy them, you would learn tons. But if you add the words and the way that he goes about describing the process of drawing the head, you're really going to put yourself in a great position to become a really effective drawer or painter of heads. Here he starts talking about the shading of the planes and the tonal quality of the planes of the human head. And, he expresses how that will help build the three-dimensionality, the three-dimensional illusions. And he helps build some systems. So, for example, he outlines the fact that the forehead is going to have, the front of the forehead is going to consist of 3 planes, 1, 2, 3. The area above the lip is going to be a little convex. It's going to come out and it's going to be constructed of 3 planes, 1, 2, 3. So will the nose. And he goes on and on with some really helpful information. And again, just chock filled of drawings, that show the head drawn at different angles. He goes into the effects of perspective and how that should influence, how the head is constructed. And you can see him here using the reference, kind of like a transparent kind of building shape here, with the head blown up to fit within that square, three-dimensional square, to kind of illustrate, how you would consider the influence of perspective on the human head, and then goes about doing so with the head tilted at different angles as well. Just really, really helpful. He goes on to say the handling of perspective marks the difference between the amateur and the professional. Every object drawn has to have an eye level or horizon, felt if not actually represented. On the left, we see the planes of the head as seen from above or below the eye level. If the head were as big as a building, it would be affected by perspective in the same way as a building is. And you see that reflected here. So we're going to move a little bit more quickly here, just so we kind of stay on time here and leave some time to show you how I'm mounting some of my pastel drawings or paintings. I know we have some people that have strong opinions. Are they paintings? Are they drawings? I don't know. It doesn't matter. I just like soft pastel and the effects that they create. So here you can see he talks about the variety and spacing that you'll see amongst different heads and different people, and emphasizes the fact that you always build off of the middle line. Not every human head is going to be perfectly symmetrical, but it's important to at least start from that that starting point of a symmetrical head, and you could always make adjustments for crooked noses, crooked shaped heads, crooked jaws, eyes that aren't in perfect alignment, and so on and so forth, facial expressions, but always start building off of those central lines, the brow line, which is the central horizontal line, and then the vertical horizontal line that runs up and down the nose. And he gets into, indicating character and how, every human face is different based upon our life experience, our mood, our health, so on and so forth, our age. He talks about rhythm. And that's really interesting. I'm primarily a landscape painter, trying to, build my experience as a portrait artist. The idea of rhythm is something that I normally associate with some of the marks that you make in landscape painting, but it does apply to portraiture as well, in drawing and painting. And he has some thoughts here which are really, really interesting. And you can see more in my notes. He talks about how some people have a natural rhythm right here. So when you're actually working with somebody, a sitter who's sitting for a portrait, he talks about how some people have a natural rhythm. Others must strive to acquire it. Take a pencil in the palm of your hand and between your thumb and first finger, and rather than holding it as if you would to write, between tight, cramped fingers, swing it over your paper using your wrist and arm, and keep your fingers still. This is the way to draw a rhythmic line. So some interesting ideas, and he gives some examples of different artists that tended to draw with in a rhythmic manner. He mentions George Bridgman, and I'm less familiar with him than I'd like to be, but he talks about how he was an anatomy teacher and he gave these lectures, and he would draw with a crayon on the end of a 4-foot stick, and in his anatomy classes he would draw these hyper enlarged anatomy figures. I think that might be quite fun, but also references some of the rhythmic movements that he included in some of his drawings. So he goes on to talk about the rhythmic lines of the head and shares some ideas there. He talks about the standard head, and then he talks about the proportions of the male head in more detail. So you can see the width of the eyes is going to be roughly the same width of the space in between the eyes, and also roughly the same width of the nose. And you can see the ends of the mouth typically are going to be relatively close to the space that you'll find the pupils in. It's pretty close. And then there's all other ways that you can subdivide the typical human head and use those measurements as a way to make sure you're placing the features in your drawing accurately, which is really nice. And when we went through the portraiture workshop with Alan Picard, he kind of shared how he does this using different tools, whether it be a ruler, a measuring stick, a pencil or a pastel, or your hands, to constantly measure the alignment of the different features to make sure that they measure up to some of these standard ways to place and scale different features within the head. Really, really interesting stuff. And you have some more drawings, more ideas, just an incredible book. So, I'm sharing this as kind of supplemental to the 10-minute book summary that I provided. I'm also I have some updates I need to make, but I'm going to include a text version, a PDF version of that 10-minute book summary on my Patreon page, so you'll be able to find it there if you're interested in downloading that. That'll be available to any members that subscribe to my Patreon page. You can see here that there's more ideas about how to consider the flesh hanging off of the skull, which is really important. It varies by muscle structure, by age, and so on and so forth. And he gives some really good examples of that later on in the book. And here we have some incredible drawings of the internal anatomy that have been completed by the author, Andrew Loomis. It talks about how muscles function, how they impact the skin, and how you would draw the face, and how the muscles appear from different angles and perspectives, and so on and so forth. All intended to be really helpful in the understanding of how to draw the human head. He gives a rundown of the forms of the mouth and other parts of the body, and he goes on to describe in some pretty painstaking detail the mechanics of the mouth. And he talks about the cylindrical nature of the mouth and the throat, and some of the common mistakes. A lot of folks will tend to draw the mouth as a flat plane when it needs to be round, and it is a complex kind of network of compound curves. You have the mouth and the throat and the palate and the teeth arranged in a circular fashion, in a three-dimensional circular fashion, and it's important to account for that. And then you have the lips that are spread over that, and you can see here he kind of outlines the major planes involved with each section of the mouth. The space above the upper lip has three main planes on the front side of that area. So does the upper lip, three main planes. The lower lip has two main planes, and then the chin back to three main planes. And describes how these are things that can be easily memorized, and it can help accelerate the accuracy and effectiveness and efficiency with which we draw the various areas of the human head, like the mouth. He goes on to talk about how it's one of the more troubling areas too, and at the same time one of the most important areas when trying to incorporate different expressions. Here he says the basis of most expressions is usually the mouth. And then he goes on for a long period of time here to describe how it's not easy to draw. It's difficult to draw, and a lot of people don't get it right. But he gives some ideas on how you can increase your chances of getting it correct. And then he goes through similar analysis of the eye. So just amazing, helpful input, and he incorporates his own personal drawings and sketches, all which are excellent. And construction of the nose and the ears. The appearance of the nose and the ears is affected by the point of view from which they are drawn. And this is something that challenges us who are trying to paint and draw the human head all the time. There are going to be times where, your quarter-turned head facing down a little bit, a full profile, somebody looking up. And that's going to change what it is you can actually see on the face. And in order to render the human head correctly, you need to accurately account for that. And that foundational step of using the ball and plane as the basis for starting a drawing or a painting can really help get that down accurately. He goes through capturing different expressions, the laugh, various other expressions, disgust. This guy looks pretty disgusted. This guy looks like he might be holding in a fart. Anyway, I'm just being silly. And then he gives a really incredible breakdown of detailed descriptions of the different areas of the human face, the jaw muscle, the lip muscle, the flesh, droops here, the hollow of the chin, where there's bone, and that's intended to help the artist kind of, process, embrace the process of accurately depicting the nature of each of the planes. The hard bone of the forehead, the eyebrow muscle. And he even goes on to suggest that if you are able to memorize each of these features, it'll also help you accelerate the rate at which you're able to accurately render the human head. Male, female, old, young, child, what have you, it doesn't matter. If you could remember these specific areas, it's going to help you, get these accurate drawings done more effectively and more efficiently. All right, we're going to cruise through much more quickly now. He goes into tone. He gives an incredible explanation of the difference between cast shadows and halftones here. Just really well said, efficient use of words. And he actually shows you some examples with his own drawings. Then he talks about modeling the planes once again. Here he talks about combining anatomy, construction, and the planes. Goes on to say this page is one of the most important in the book since it shows the stages of drawing a head from anatomy and construction through the outline to the planes and the final completion of the drawing. It would be impossible to follow without considerable study of the preceding information, not in order to copy this head, but to draw one yourself. Study this page carefully. So there's this page is dog-eared. I definitely have it dog-eared and there's notes. But if you look at his drawings, you can see what he means. Here it is, the ball and plane, anatomy accounted for, the initial line drawing of the face. He starts incorporating some of the shading within and amongst the planes, and then he refines the drawing here. And then here, this section that follows that, where he talks about plate, he moves on from plate 33 to 34, plate 34. He talks about building tone with the planes, and I noted here that this could easily apply not only to drawing, but to painting in pastel, oil, acrylic, and watercolor as well. So he goes on to say here, this page shows how the planes may be treated as straight, flat surfaces, each carrying its own value between light and dark. The very light planes should have very little tone and be treated very delicately. By directing the stroke, you can make the plane turn without changing the value more than slightly. You can get more solidity if you make all the planes in the light a little lighter than they appear, and those in the shadow a little darker. So he's talking about putting a little emphasis and using the actual pencil strokes or lines to accentuate the direction of the plane and the movement in between the plane transitions to help emphasize the three-dimensional nature of the figure. And you see this in some of the great paintings, the oil paintings that are done involving portraiture and other medium as well. Notable quote here, every head is an individual assemblage of shapes, lines, and spaces. And, the header line here right next to plate 35, every head is a separate problem. I can't help but think that that has multiple meanings. And there's some sketches of some famous and semi-famous people. I have to believe this is Mark Twain. Talks about characterization and bringing some of the character, the individuality into drawings. Then he moves on to women's heads. I don't mean to shortchange, this section or the children's section, but a lot of the same content is going to be covered in a similar structure. Just drawing comparison to and between and amongst the adult male head versus the adult female head. There are some subtle differences in the typical proportions and arrangement of shapes. He talks about how the typical female head is a little less angular. There might be some more curved lines that would be acceptable in a drawing of a female figure. In most instances, obviously, there's always outliers. He talks about how the eyes sometimes are commonly positioned a little bit further away from the outside of the head. The mouth is typically going to be a little narrower. The nose might be slightly less elongated. Not always the case, but these are subtle details that can be accounted for and assumed when drawing the basic structure of the female head, just based upon his study of anatomy, both scientifically and as an artist. He talks about how muscle and bone are just less apparent in the women's heads, and he even talks about how sometimes with an athletic woman, that difference might lessen a little bit. And he talks about, how to draw hair. And you can see he does an effective job himself, all types of hairstyles. And just an incredible number of plates and examples of his own drawings, which are just phenomenal. And I guess back in the 1940s, if you had the ability to draw women and young children and babies, you could basically write your ticket in the world of illustration. I guess a lot of the advertisements at the time tended to focus on that demographic. So he references the importance of somebody that wants commercial success of being able to draw women. He goes on to describing how to shift the approach when dealing with an older subject, and includes some incredible explanation and examples. And he goes on to babies. I mean, this is just a remarkable book. I know I say this whenever I walk through or review a book, but this is one of my favorite all-time art-related books. It is just so full of information and laid out in a way that's easy to digest, easy to follow. Obviously, it helps if you have a little bit of a background and experience trying to create drawings or paintings, or if you've experienced any sort of academic kind of art, but art instruction. But it's not necessary. If you take your time and you follow some of the exercises and take the time to study what it is that you're reviewing, you'll be able to successfully apply this stuff. And interwoven throughout it, it's not all technical, as you've seen already with some of the examples that I've read through, but here's one of my favorite quotes. He suggests here, let us understand that no branch of art can be reduced completely to a formula without endangering the very art that must go into it. We do, of course, seek ways and means to an end, and that end is correctness. Art, however, is not the justification of correctness. Art is not always perfection. Let us say that art is truly a form of expression, and full expression cannot be limited by formula, but only guided toward greater meaning and truth. And he gives some examples of how some wonderful art really isn't an attempt to be perfect or render photorealism, photorealistic accuracy. It's somebody's expression of thought and feeling and so on and so forth that make it remarkable. All right, so he goes through children of all ages, and if you just look at his drawings, the dude was amazing. And he gives explanations of some of the unique differences in the development of the skull and facial features at various ages of development through young children, the school-age children, the teenagers, young adults. So, this is something that I can't imagine how long this project must have taken him, but I'm grateful that he put the time in. It's interesting. He occasionally will sprinkle in some diagrams that are not as easy to understand, but you can see here he's trying to frame up, some of the geometry of the face here. And you can see the little triangle that surrounds the eyes and the brow and the nose and comes down through the chin, the center line that goes up and down the center plane vertically of the face. Just interesting way to look at it. And he breaks it out into these little subsections, and just really helpful information. And I imagine this is something, as long as I can keep hold of this book and I don't lose it or loan it out, I'll probably make reference to this with any commission requests that I get, with any attempts to do any paintings of human heads and faces and hands on my own, for my own purposes. So anyway, we are running short on time. I don't want to go over an hour. But then he goes into hands. And he goes on to say, perhaps no aspect of drawing is accompanied by more confusion and provided with less adequate material for study than is the drawing of the hands. Much of the trouble is caused by searching for material instead of using the materials you have available, because your own two hands have the best source of information available. And that's so true, right? You can draw your own hands at any time, either by looking in a mirror, taking a picture of them, or just setting one down on the table and drawing it with your dominant hand. But here's where he goes into some really good explanation. Here we go. The most important fact to remember about the hand is that it is hollow on the palm side and convex on the top. So obviously convex, meaning it's kind of arched on the top outward, and then concave, meaning that this hollow, or the inner palm of your hand here in between your pads, is concave. And I guess that's missed with a lot of amateurs or less experienced artists. They miss incorporating that into the design of their drawings of the hands. He goes into the anatomy, and then he gives you some incredible drawings. Some mechanical in nature, they look like robot hands. Some real-life line drawings with explanation of proportionality. And he goes into some detail regarding the hollow of the hand. I just love the way he describes that. Some of the reliable assumptions you can make regarding proportionality. The length of the thumb, the length of the forefinger. He goes into foreshortening, which is when you're looking at the hand and incorporating perspective as it changes positions. And the hand in action, describing how the wrist joint works and how the different joint works within your knuckles and so on and so forth. Just really, really helpful. Even if you were just to copy some of these drawings that he's made, that he's provided of these hands, you would take huge advances in your comfort and your confidence and your ability to draw the human hand. I know, because I've done it myself. And he goes into children's hands and babies' hands. And provides all these studies of different hands, young adults, and then older folks as well. And he gives a brief farewell conclusion, and goes on to emphasize that this book will not do the work for anyone, but they can make individual effort more practical and profitable, speeding the acquiring of much needed knowledge so that the artist can have more years of successful practice. So that's really his intention with his effort of writing this book. And he concludes with some really nice ideas. This beautiful drawing. You can see his signature here, Andrew Loomis. And that's it. That's a wrap. So, I would suggest, if you're interested, pick this up. Some incredible help is given in the effort to get better at drawing the human head and the human hands. So one last thing before we wrap up. I've been doing these portraits and landscape paintings in pastel. I know the lighting's horrible here, so but you can see this little landscape pastel. I'm going to zoom out a little bit that I did. It's 9 by 12, and it's on sanded paper, which I acquired in advance of that workshop that I was telling you about that I did with Alan Picard. What I'm going to try and do is mount these on foam board or gator board in advance based upon his recommendation of doing any of this work in the future because it's a little cleaner. But I was able to successfully mount 5 of my 6 recent paintings in pastel on self-adhesive foam backing board. And that's what I have this mounted on right here. It was super easy to do, and I did it after the fact, which really was intimidating for me. You just need to be careful and take it slow. I was able to do it, with this Abe Lincoln portrait as well, and then a bunch of my other paintings, including a nice painting that I did of the Brooklyn Bridge, and another painting that I did of Bob Marley, and another painting of this little nocturne that I did, which is basically the view of my studio. So I work inside of my garage. That's where my studio is located in our house. So our house is off to the right here. It's an attached garage. And, I'll sit within the 2 rooms within this section of the garage and do my work. It's where I'm actually filming from right now. But when I walk the dog, sometimes I'll see scenes like this. In this case, the moon was setting because this was the early morning before the sun had come up and before the moon had set, and painted this particular scene. But this too is mounted. It'll make it much easier to frame. In some cases, I might package it in biodegradable cellophane envelopes if I take it, if I decide to go to a fair or sell it unframed. That's one way that you can package it. So I am going to go ahead and attempt to mount my Monet portrait. Before I do that, I'll show you 2 more works. Here's a Bob Marley portrait that I did. This too, I was able to mount after the fact. I held my breath because I really love that portrait and I didn't want to ruin it. And then this drawing of the Brooklyn Bridge, or painting of the Brooklyn Bridge too. I was able to mount this after the fact without doing, any damage to it, thankfully. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the process of trying to mount my Monet portrait. So I have this self-adhesive foam backing board. Some people will recommend using Gator board. I wasn't able to find the specific Gator board brand pre-cut, and I didn't want to get involved in trying to cut it because I don't have the right equipment to do it. But I found this foam backing board, which got some pretty good reviews online, and I could put notes in where I actually bought it from online. I was able to get it pre-cut, 9 inches by 12 inches to match the dimensions of most of the sanded pastel paper that I have. And I'm going to probably mount them before painting going forward, but it's just good to know. It was a big relief to know that I can successfully mount these paintings after they're done. And all you do is, I'm actually going to pull in, this is the Monet portrait. I'm going to do portraits of some of my heroes, both some that are personal and some that I just admire from afar. Abe Lincoln, Bob Marley, Monet, those are obviously famous people who I don't know personally and never would or never did. I'm not quite that old, believe it or not, but They're folks that I admire based upon their biographies and their works. So I'm going to move into some personal portraits, some of my ancestors, some of my great aunts and uncles and grandparents and that sort of thing. But for now, I'll knock off a short list of others as well along the way. And what I'm doing is I'm just going to pull off this backing. Just be careful not to pull off that first layer of adhesive. That can be easily done. There's a little laminate on here on both sides of the foam, and you don't want to peel that off. You just want to peel this paper backing off. And in this case, I'm going to save this and make sure that I put it down on a clean surface, this backing, because that's going to be a key ingredient in mounting this finished painting without destroying it. So I'm going to set this backing aside on a clean surface, face up so it doesn't collect any dust. And then I'm going to align this existing pastel painting, being careful to hold it on the edges so I don't inadvertently smear it. I have put some fixative on here, what is it called? Spray fixative. Unworkable, but still, you don't want to risk smudging it. So you just try and align one edge as best as possible. I'm working from the top down, and middle out. It's kind of the opposite of the Biden economic plan. Top down, middle out, as opposed to bottom up, middle out. Anyway, I don't want to get political, but you can see it's pretty close to being aligned on the edges. I'm hanging over a little bit here. This is workable, so I can carefully peel it up and adjust it if I need to. And I'm going to do that. Yeah, I'm going to take the time to do that and see what happens. Hopefully I don't destroy this. Let's see. All right, you know what? I'm not going to risk it. Okay. There we go. Okay. So I'm going to take, if I need to, I could always trim that. I'm going to take this, just this edge is hanging over a little bit, and you can see this edge is a little bit exposed. And that's completely okay, because when I frame this, the edges will be covered. That much I know. Okay. All right. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this little sheet that was used to cover the adhesive, and I'm going to carefully rest that on top, making sure it does not slide. We don't want it sliding and smudging the drawing. I'm going to hold it down with one hand and just work my way around the surface, making sure that there are no bubbles. I wouldn't say this is burnishing this. I'm just making sure I'm working through every section and ensuring that there's no bubbles, and that every part of that surface of the back side of the painting is in contact with that adhesive. And I'm carefully going to lift it off and do my best to do so without smudging. And there you have it. So you have this Monet pastel painting mounted on this firm foam laminate backing board, so it could more easily be framed. It could be displayed just by leaning it up against a wall on the shelf. And it also can be packaged in a cellophane envelope and stored and protected if that's something you wanted to do as an artist. I think I'll probably package some up and try and sell them, perhaps maybe at some craft fairs or what have you later on this year. So anyway, I thought I'd share that. It was helpful. It was exciting to learn that. I've been doing pastel drawings for about 25 or 30 years, and I didn't know that, but I never really tried to commercially sell them. So getting to the point where I'd like to do so, and I think it'll be helpful in that effort. Anyway, we're coming upon an hour. I appreciate your time. Check out the notes. You'll find a link to the 10-minute book summary, 10-minute book brief, where I provide some brief notes and an outline of what drawing the head and hands from Andrew Loomis is all about. I'll include a link to my Patreon page where you can access the written version of that summary if you're interested in downloading that. I'll also put a link to the source from which I got this nice self-adhesive backing board and some additional notes. Thanks for checking out my video. Make sure you tune in again every Wednesday, 9 p.m. Just about every Wednesday, 9 p.m. We'll walk through some other stuff that I'm working on here in the studio. Take care.